I'm Brandi. Kruse. Coming up today on Undivided, after 12 long years, it's Governor Jay Inslee's final official day in office. Will reflect on his legacy. Plus, Democrats in Olympia want to give unemployment benefits to illegal immigrants. And even Amazon is ditching DEI. We'll discuss that and much more coming up today on Undivided. Remember, you can support our show for just $5 a month by signing up at undividedpod.com. Hello, and welcome to Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. I'm Brandi. Kruse. It's the end of an era that went on for far too long in the state of Washington. It is Governor Jay Inslee's final official day in office. Governor-elect Bob Ferguson is sworn in tomorrow. And then we'll begin an era that I think at this point is sort of TBD, because we don't know who Bob Ferguson really is. Are we going to get the Bob Ferguson who he's been for the last 12 years, or are we going to get some new and improved version of Bob, or God forbid, a worse version of Bob? But I want to spend today giving Jay Inslee a proper farewell. Lord knows I've had my share of interactions with the governor over the years. I've interviewed him many times. I mean, certainly more than a dozen times in my former career in legacy news. You know, I wish I could start with something positive about our governor. I find it very hard. I'm digging deep. I'm digging real deep. You know, I will say that I wasn't prepared to say something positive. I will say that I admire anyone who wants to have a career in public service. He's dedicated 12 years to that job. I guess good for him. You know, I think on his surface, I guess I would sit here and say, well, he seems kind, but I know better than that because of some of the clips that we're going to play of him being not kind to people who disagree with him politically or on his policy positions. Nicole, am I being too harsh? Is there something very positive you can think? He's good at drawing. He's a doodler, as he says. He's kind of art inclined.
He's not bad at basketball, I think. I think my mic's not working.
Yeah, your mic's not on. Sorry. We'll fix it later. Not bad at basketball. You know, he was willing to do interviews with me at some points over the years, even though I was very harsh on him. So I guess I appreciate that. But, you know, his legacy for me is clear. I think he leaves behind a legacy of lies. I think he leaves behind a legacy of deception. I think he leaves behind a horrible legacy that continues today when it comes to his handling of the pandemic. You know, I was thinking back today on my drive in about some of the more memorable moments of our outgoing governor. You know, I will think of him as someone who insults people who dare to disagree with him. For instance, how he went across the globe to call people who were concerned that his climate policy was putting them in the poorhouse miscreants.
Brilliant voters of the state of Washington rejected these miscreants' efforts by a 62-38 margin.
I will remember how at a time in our state when he should have been working hard to bring people together during the COVID-19 pandemic, he was instead vilifying large swaths of Washington voters.
You are a bioreactor facility generating virus and spreading it around, including to kids who can't get vaccinated. I want to reiterate that. If you're a 50-year-old man who, voted for Donald Trump and didn't think COVID was a problem and you don't get vaccinated right now, you arrest every kid in your city.
I will remember that rather than bringing other people into the fold to try to get us through one of the most complex and confusing times we've ever faced as a state, that he ruled over us like a dictator for 975 days.
There's only one person in the state of Washington who has the capability to save those lives right now, and it happens to be the governor of the state of Washington.
And I'll certainly remember all of the issues that he made worse. Crime.
The fundamental underlying challenge is that we do not have enough housing in our state for our people.
Yeah, crime, homelessness, as you heard there, Governor Inslee saying that the fundamental underlying issue with our housing or homelessness crisis is housing, which we all know is not true. Homelessness, despite the billions of dollars that we've spent on it under Governor Jay Inslee, has gotten exponentially worse. Our mental health crisis has gotten exponentially worse. The state's largest psychiatric hospital lost its federal accreditation under this governor, which we know has only fed into the homelessness crisis, the crime crisis, the drug crisis has gotten exponentially worse. I mean, you name any critical issue facing the state of Washington, and it has gotten exponentially worse under this governor. Of course, you can't talk about his legacy without talking about his climate agenda and how many of the things the goals that he set forth to say, oh, I'm the climate governor, aren't even realistically feasible. Some of the things like the Climate Commitment Act that he pushed through are just a massive money grab. And I'll remember all the things that he did to keep that grift going. I'll remember the fact that he decided before the election, so voters wouldn't repeal the Climate Commitment Act, to bribe them with their own money.
Are you trying to bribe voters with this?
No, they're trying to take away $200 from these families. Who wants to take away $200 credit from a family to help them with their costs of these low-income folks? That's reprehensible. You know what else? It's weird.
Yeah, and I'll remember when there was pressure on him for saying, I'm going to bribe people with energy credits with their own money and act like I'm doing them a favor. He literally used children as human props to avoid difficult questions.
These kids, when they're 72 years of age, like I am, will have a Washington state where there's some trees that haven't burned down, where they can breathe because forest fire smoke has not ruined their lungs, where their mom and dad got little help financially with their utility bills, where they can get on a school bus that's electric and drive for free. What I would say to them is these kids deserve those things.
Yeah, not the first time or the last time he used individuals as human props. Remember when he was cleaning up the homeless encampment and people were questioning why his right-of-way initiative was costing taxpayers like $1 million per homeless person to get them out of homelessness? And he gathered around the low-income people who were helping to clean up trash. And he said, well, I believe we need to pay these people. Don't you? Don't you think we have to pay these people? Basically trying to justify spending $1 million per person to get them out of homelessness in his failed initiative. I think there are two clips for Governor Inslee that always play back in my mind. One of them is more recent than the other, but it just shows how brazen, I think, and how bold he was willing to be in his deception when it came to pushing policies that would suit his agenda. I mean, I have to keep going back to the Climate Commitment Act and the fact that the first time they passed or that they looked to pass a carbon tax way back in 2014, Governor Inslee's own staff said, yeah, this is going to increase gas prices, so we should be prepared for that. You fast forward, they try to push it through the second time, and Governor Inslee lied repeatedly for multiple years in order to get the CCA passed about the impact it would have on gas prices.
At what point are you going to tell the people of Washington State that they're going to possibly see much higher gas prices next year because of the CO2 emissions tax?
Well, that's not true. They are not going to see much higher gas prices, maybe even lower than they are today. This is going to have minimal impact, if any. Pennies. We're talking about pennies, potentially.
Yeah, pennies. And he still has not today, as he leaves office, still has not today acknowledged that he spent 2 years, and there would be nothing, he would lose nothing by it. The CCA survived an initiative. The CCA is here to stay, most likely. There would be no consequence for him coming out besides his personal being labeled a liar, which we're already labeling him. No consequence in terms of the bill being impacted or the policy being impacted for him to come out and say, you know what, it has increased gas prices. Yeah, in hindsight, even though he knew it all along. So he lies willingly, and not only to push his policy agenda, but to avoid accountability for the last 12 years. The most memorable moment, not just because I was involved in it, because I think I was so stunned by the clear deception and how shameless he was when he lied. We're in the middle of CHOP, 6 blocks of the state's largest city taken over, and he acts as if he knows nothing about it.
Governor, I'd like to ask you about what's going on in Seattle. There's this thing called the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. What's your thought on that? The fact that the protesters have taken that over and not allowing people to come and go freely?
Well, that's news to me, so I'll have to reserve any comment about it. I have not heard anything about that.
What should voters make of the fact that you were apparently oblivious to police abandoning an entire precinct in the state's largest city? You have 1 minute, 15 seconds.
Yeah, well, listen, if you look at the facts of that situation, I could not have been oblivious to it because I actually deployed the Washington State National Guard.
Sir, then why do you say you did not know about it?
You'll have to go back and look at some quote. I can't comment on the quote right now.
This is news to me. You went on to say, I haven't heard about it from any credible source. Nearly 2 days after CHOP happened, you're now saying you did know about CHOP.
Listen, I can't tell. I knew about CHOP.
Yeah. So farewell to Governor Inslee. While he's drawing his doodles, he can draw a doodle of the door not hitting him in the ass on the way out. That's truly how I feel about it. This is someone who inflicted untold amount of damage on families in Washington state during the pandemic, still has not apologized for what he put state employees through when it came to the vaccine mandate, many of whom's, like, their lives changed forever. They lost their livelihoods. They never got them back. Never admitted, never had any desire to go back and acknowledge that some of the things they did were wrong in the moment. No humility whatsoever. No introspection. You know, this is someone who, on his watch, Washington state had the lowest number of police officers per capita, said nothing about police defunding until a year or two after the fact, and then wanted to act like he was the best friend of law enforcement. Wasn't even invited. This is a governor that was rarely ever invited to the funerals of fallen officers, including the funerals of fallen Washington State Patrol troopers. That tells you all you need to know about Jay Inslee. Look, I'm sure when he's not dictating other people's lives, I'm sure he is a good husband and a good father and a good grandfather, and I wish him well. It kills me in the back of my mind that he is going to likely fall into a 7-figure job in the climate sector that is going to be paid in part by the policies he pushed on working class people in the state of Washington. So I have really not a lot of positive things. I wish I could be more undivided, so to speak, and share some good stories about our outgoing governor. But the truth is, he was never qualified for the job. He might have been qualified on paper as a former congressman. He was never up to the task. That's the truth. Sitting in front of him and doing an interview with him, even as a 20-something, was horrifying. I mean, the lack of knowledge on basic things, and I've said this over the years, this is not the first time I'm saying this. It was like talking to a wall. And he ruled our state for 12 years, and in large part because the media allowed him to. The Seattle Times came out with this big thing on Governor Inslee's, legacy and stuff. And they had said that he leaves behind sort of a mixed legacy because obviously all these issues have gotten much worse, including climate issues, by the way. He wants to act like he was the climate governor. Climate issues in our state, by his standards, have gotten much worse. But I looked at that Seattle Times article and I said, I don't want to hear anything the Seattle Times has to say. I don't want to read anything the Seattle Times has to say critical about Jay Inslee, because the Seattle Times would endorse him, even though they knew that he wasn't up to the task, that he was doing a bad job, that Washington state is in a far, far worse off place than we were 12 years ago when he took over from Christine Gregoire. Oh, and not even to mention the year that he spent gallivanting across the country 50% of his time running a presidential campaign where he got 1% in the polls. So this is someone who never should have been governor in the first place, but certainly never should have been governor for 3 terms. And the media has a lot of responsibility in not holding him accountable in a way where he was forced to contend with some of these issues more aggressively and more honestly. He got away with so many lies, so much deception, so much gaslighting, so much incompetence. And that's what politicians do, I guess. It's the media's job to hold them accountable, and the media absolutely fell flat. So farewell to Governor Jay Inslee. Maybe in a couple months from now, I'll be begging to have you back because Bob Ferguson will be that much worse. But I do know a few things about Bob Ferguson. I know he's incredibly intelligent. So in that sense, I think that that's an improvement. I don't mean to be mean, but I'm just being frank with you. He right now is acting like he wants to be a fiscal conservative. I don't trust him. But if he wants to do that for the first few months, hopefully he continues on that path. But the bottom line is we needed a change. I'm not sure it's going to be the best change for Washington State, but after 12 years of the same person, we should never allow one person to rule a state for 12 years. More than 7 million Washingtonians, you're telling me that is the only person who was qualified enough to be the governor for 12 years. That's insane. So farewell to Governor Jay Inslee. We'll have a little farewell for him as well at the end of the show today. But Bob Ferguson sworn in tomorrow, and of course we'll continue to cover his governorship in a way that you will not see it covered elsewhere in the legacy media, because they've already shown they're not up to the task of covering one governor. They're not going to be up to the task of covering another governor of the same party. And they weren't up to the task of covering Bob Ferguson's campaign for governor and pointing out his lies and his failures. So you think now that suddenly he's governor, that's going to change? No, the media is going to continue to fail on this issue, and we're going to have to continue to pick up the slack. All right, so the legislative session is in day 2. Day 1, they had a hearing on rent control, which I had hoped, maybe, we got a new governor. Maybe they're not interested in pushing super far left policies to his desk, etc. Maybe they'll give him a little respite from that and they'll focus on these budget issues. No, you can't do that. They are going to go back. And I would argue some of the policies this session look to be even more extreme. We'll get to one of them later on in the show. Unemployment benefits for illegal immigrants. Insane stuff. So they have re-upped rent control. It didn't pass last legislative session, but not by very much. And we know that things have only improved for Democrats in Olympia. A couple moderate senators are no longer in Olympia, and they've been, they're going to be the makeup. I look at it not just as Democrat and Republican, but Democrat, Republican, and then the ideologues and the moderates on the Democrat side, because there were some moderate Democrats that would quash things like this. But now, they're gone, and so the concentration of ideologues on the left is much more significant. So House Bill 1217 is a bill that you're going to want to keep your eye on, and we will certainly be keeping our eye on throughout the legislative session. Has to do with rent control. It says the legislature declares that failure to act urgently to protect Washingtonians from excessive rent increases will result in continued harm for millions of residents, especially when considering the essential nature of housing. So a couple key things. It includes a 7% cap on yearly rent increases for existing tenants. There are some exceptions to that, like if, for instance, you have a building and it's operated by a nonprofit. It also requires landlords to give 180 days notice before an increase of 3% or more, limits some fees for move-in, move-out, etc. First, let me just say, this is rent control. Despite what you're going to hear from Democrats, remember the language. We don't use their language. And the media shouldn't be using their language either, because they should see that their language has an intention. Why call it rent control, which has a very bad connotation, when you can call it rent stabilization? Doesn't that sound nicer? And the last time they debated this in Olympia, the media was all in on that. Oh yeah, every headline, rent stabilization, or they wouldn't use the word rent control. They would just say, a bill to cap rent increases. So they adopt the language that the left wants them to adopt because it has a different connotation. So when you read an article or hear a news story calling it rent stabilization, you know in your mind that that is the language that Democrats want the media to parrot for them. And so I would recommend calling out the media when you see that. When you see an article, when you see a tweet, when you see a post that says rent stabilization, ask them why they call it rent stabilization and not rent control. Very similar to when they pushed through the home ownership, home covenant program. They called it something like that, the home covenant program or something. It was reparations. So they used this covenant term. What even is that? I don't even know what that is, so I'm just going to ignore it. And then they passed it, and then honest to God, the sponsor of the bill came out and said, this is the first in the nation reparations bill. So she didn't want to use the word reparations until it was already signed into law by the governor. So, the fact that the media parrots language when everyone knows this as rent control is a significant part of the problem. So this is being pushed by Representative Emily Alvarado, a Democrat who represents parts of West Seattle and Burien, and she talked about the need for this pressing legislation.
Washingtonians are asking for pragmatic solutions to stop unnecessary and excessive rent increases. That's what this bill does. Washingtonians are asking for our help to rein in unjustifiable costs and make it easier to live, raise a family, and retire with dignity, and that's what this bill does. This is a balanced policy that caps and prevents excessive rent increases, but it lets landlords raise the rent each year, invest in the property, and make a profit.
Yeah. So here's exactly what's going to happen if rent control were to go into effect. Landlords will feel compelled to have to raise rent 7% every single year, even if they don't necessarily have to, even if their costs have not increased that year. It will be a guaranteed 7% increase on rent for every unit every single year. So you're going to see rents increase at a more predictable, yes, but a more rapid pace than before, because they don't want to be caught holding the bag if there is a year where their costs increase exponentially because of things the legislature does. Like right now, they're pushing an increase in property taxes. That's going to go to homeowners and property owners who they're not going to eat that. They're going to pass it along. You expect them to eat that? No, they're going to pass it along. And so what they have to do is they have to hedge their bets. I would do it and say, all right, every year, 7% increase built in. Because the one year where I have to increase 20% and I'm not able to, all those years I increase 7%, it's going to make up for that. They're going to do that, or they're going to sell their rental units. You know, not just because of rent control, but all the other things that are going on that just stick it to landlords. You know, making it nearly impossible to get a bona fide squatter out of your home. I mean, I don't have to go through all the horror cases that have already scared so many landowners. And I go back to what they say the purpose of this bill was. The failure to act urgently to protect Washingtonians from excessive rent increases will result in continued harm for millions of residents, especially when considering the essential nature of housing. Yeah, housing is essential, and you guys keep saying over and over and over again that we have a housing shortage. Yet you are totally blind to the fact that the policies you push make the housing shortage worse. Bob Ferguson wants to do, I think it's like a couple 100,000 net units of new housing in his first few years. You think this is going to help with that? This is going to help with that. And it's just obvious. It's so plain as day when you just look at what's already happened. And rent control is just going to make it worse. So there were a ton of people who showed up day one of the legislative session to testify either in favor of or against this bill. I mean, some of the landlords that flocked to Olympia yesterday from all over the state, it was insane. There were some overflow rooms. Not all of them got a chance to testify, which was a bummer. But here is let's start with the pro rent control, folks. Here's a few.
My last residence of 7 years, I was given 60 days notice for a $900 rent increase, which at the time would have been 69% of my income. My current residence of almost 10 years, I had a $150 rent increase 2 years ago, which was 40% of my increase. 40% of my income, and a $400 increase last year, which was 46% of my income. And I was really anxious this year about a new lease, but my landlord's actually going to sell and will not be renewing my lease. So now I have to come up with first last deposit, which is generally a month's rent, and to make 2.5 to 3 times the rent. And I'm a social worker.
70% of small residential rentals, both here and nationally, are owned by small landlords like me. Our needs are not like those of large landlords. For them, a vacancy might cost a few percent of lost revenue. A vacancy costs me 25% of my rental revenue. Smart landlords know that our revenue relies on our tenant stability. Having long-term stable tenants is the only way this works for me, and I think that's the same for other small landlords. In practice, this bill will work for everyone.
Trying to maintain stability for my children is non-existent when we are forced to move repeatedly. From my lived experience, along with data collected from more renters of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color here in Washington, the discrimination in housing stability like ours will continue without rent stabilization to keep landlords and property management from raising rents to evict people of color like my already victimized family.
Yeah, the most progressive state in the nation. We got people testifying that they're being evicted because of the color of their skin. It's just insane. Can you replay, just because that was a doozy, I have so much to say about that, just the first chick? Just play the first part of that clip.
My last residence of 7 years, I was given 60 days notice for a $900 rent increase, which at the time would have been 69% of my income. My current residence of almost 10 years, I had a $150 rent increase 2 years ago, which was 40% of my increase. 40% of my income, and a $400 increase last year, which was 46% of my income. And I was really anxious this year about a new lease, but my landlord's actually going to sell and will not be renewing my lease. So now I have to come up with first last deposit, which is generally a month's rent, and to make 2.5 to 3 times the rent. And I'm a social worker.
Okay, a couple things there. You caught that. I don't know, her math's all over the place. I'm not sure. But also, the rent as a percentage of your income doesn't matter at all. Like, so that you should never be paying that much in rent of, like, as a percentage of your income to begin with. And so that means you need to move further out. Sorry, that's just the way it is. You need to find a rental unit you can afford, find roommates, whatever it is. Like, that's an insane, has nothing to do with increase. And it doesn't have anything to do with, they're not saying that you can only increase like 7% of a person's income. It's 7% of the existing cost of the rent. So her math is really weird. But you hear what she said at the end there, that her landlord is selling. So he's not. Why do you think the landlord is selling? That's the point. That's going to happen. So now she can't even make an increase work. She has to find a new place because her landlord is selling. That's what's going to happen more and more. And then what happens when more and more landlords sell? You have fewer and fewer units. And unless demand goes down, what's going to happen? Prices are going to increase. Economics 101. Here is some testimony from folks against the bill.
There's clear agreement that housing supply is a foundational issue in Washington's housing crisis. Consumer protection policies like rent stabilization do not increase housing supply, and if adopted, should not result in Washington becoming less competitive than Oregon, California, and other neighboring states for housing investment. Fear is that we're going to drive highly mobile development capital, investment capital into other states.
We may argue about the absolute incentives to invest. We cannot argue about the relative incentives, and the CPI component and the 15-year exemptions in California and Oregon would clearly make those more attractive places to invest than Washington.
Oh, God.
Largest contributors to these costs are government via property taxes, utility rates, and regulations. Some of these have unintentional consequences, especially the regulations. For example, City of Tacoma Fairness Act was passed. I tabulated the cost for 2024, and those losses equated to $240,370. To recover those losses, it will increase rents $152 per unit per year. Now, is this fair to the existing City of Tacoma residents? No, it's not. Intentions were good, but the plan will not work. Obviously, allowing a government to randomly adopt policies leads to higher rents. Please give this example and do not try to enact more regulations. They do not work. And please vote no on HB 1217. Thank you.
Did that guy just say that if we pass this, the environment would actually be more advantageous in Oregon and California for landlords? That's insane. That's insane. Is that what we want to be? And again, I don't know how to make that point to people who, like that first woman who we played her clip twice. She's sitting there making the argument against adding more burdensome regulations. Like the unit she's in is going to be sold. And she doesn't even realize it. It's really staggering. And so you can't make sense of this stuff. When you look at, you won't be able to meet Bob Ferguson if this passes. If you watch this, Bob, I don't know, maybe you secretly at night cry in your soup and watch our show. I have no idea. I'm sure somebody with your office watches it. So please pass this along to the governor-elect. You will not be able to meet the campaign promise that you made to build the amount of new housing net you said you want to be built in the state of Washington. So what's going to happen if you allow your own party, and it is up to you. If Bob Ferguson came out strongly opposed and he vetoed something like this, they don't have the ability to override his veto. If you allow this to get across the finish line, not only will you not be able to make good on your campaign promises around housing, but you will also see the housing crisis get worse and worse and worse in your first term, and related issues get worse and worse and worse in your first term. And that will absolutely bog down any success that you want to have. So if you want to have a successful first term, if you want to solve some of these critical issues that the state is facing, and you want to be able to be in a position 4 years from now to get reelected to a second term, you cannot allow your party to push through policies like this that will make it very, very difficult for you to be successful. All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about this coming up next and sort of why is this happening so soon? Sometimes they'll couch these controversial bills in a few weeks or a month in or something, day one. So we're going to talk about it with Sean Flynn of the Rental Housing Association. First, I've encouraged you guys to take the First Mark Challenge, firstmarkinsurance.com, firstmarkinsurance.com. Why? There's no reason not to. I just yell at people during these First Mark commercials because, guys, so many undivided viewers and listeners have saved thousands of dollars by taking the First Mark Challenge. It's completely free. It takes maybe an hour of your time. You gather the info on your current insurance. You schedule an appointment with them over the phone, talk about your current insurance, your insurance needs. They go out, they shop the market. Usually takes them a couple weeks. They come back to you with their recommendations. And either they're going to say, really only a couple options, we can't really do anything for you. Your insurance is already the best that you're going to get, so we recommend keeping it. Or they're going to say, hey, great news, we can save you some money. So what's the downside to it? Let's see here. Just a couple of the stories. I took the First Mark Challenge. Chase helped me. They were able to save me $1,600 a year. Beth says she saved $4,000 a year. Chad said he saved $100 a month. I mean, the stories keep coming and coming. So, I mean, I could use an extra $100 a month. I could use an extra $4,000 a year. I'm going to Cabo in April. I would cover my trip to Cabo plus some. I have like 2 trips to Cabo, depending on how much tequila I drink when I get there. So take the First Mark Challenge today. Firstmarkinsurance.com, firstmarkinsurance.com. The very best part is they work for you. All right, so obviously we're on a clear side on the rent control issue. We literally do a segment every week with the Rental Housing Association of Washington. And it's because we saw after last legislative session that this was going to be brought back up. You know, in the summer, we were in the midst of this crazy ordeal with landlords who had squatters who'd been in their house for 2 years and they couldn't get them out because the eviction backlog is so long. And so this is one of the most critical issues the state is facing, and it's also one of the most nonsensical. If you really think housing is one of the biggest challenges our state is facing, which Democrats say it is, then everything they're doing, if I had to create a list of, hey, if you want to make housing worse, do all of these things. That's literally what they're doing. They're just checking off that list. All these things that will make housing worse. And rent control will absolutely decimate Washington's housing to a point where I don't know how we recover from it. So anyway, Sean Flynn was at the hearing yesterday, along with, like I said, a ton of other housing providers who had come in from all over the state. He joins us today to talk about it. Sean Flynn, welcome back to Undivided.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I love how we're, like 6 months leading up to this session talking about the likelihood of, rent control coming back up and all that. Day one. Did you expect day one?
I don't think anyone expected day one. Day one is extraordinarily odd. Generally, day one, the legislature is still getting its feet underneath it, especially with this legislature. There's been a lot of turnover, a lot of new folks. The hearing actually started 45 minutes late, not to anyone's fault, just to it's day one. Things run. Generally, day one is swearing in. There's some receptions, but yeah, they set it day one at 1:30, directly after the swearing in ceremony in the Capitol Dome, and we were off and running. The feeling from the folks that came down, the citizens that came down to have their voice heard in Olympia, was it felt like dirty baseball. Again, the meeting started 45 minutes late due to no one's fault, but folks had driven over from Yakima, up from Vancouver, down from Bellingham to have their voices heard, and it didn't happen due to timing and other reasons. And it's disheartening when you have to tell citizens who've come to participate in their democracy that it's not going to work because they decided to have the hearing on the first day. And that they don't get their voices heard. And it was really disheartening for a lot of the members that came down, including myself. I wish that it had been handled differently.
You don't think that was intentional, though?
I think it was intentional that they want to move the bill forward and they're trying to get it done. I don't think anyone sat down and said, we don't want to hear from the constituents. I think that was a byproduct of the timing. And the chair has a lot of power. He could hold another hearing if he wanted, I think. But I don't even think we got through half the folks that wanted to speak. We had the entire hearing room full, plus 2 overflow rooms full of folks down there that wanted to be seen and heard by their government. And it felt rushed, and the optics of it were really bad, and my members were left feeling disenfranchised from their government, and that's not what we want democracy to be about. I don't think either party wants that. So, it was disappointing.
Well, we're going to agree to disagree on whether either party wants that. I feel like one party in particular has done an awful lot of disenfranchising lately, but I digress. On the general feeling of things. So, Bob Ferguson ran and talking about the need to build more affordable housing. You and I have talked at length about what rent control and similar policies would do. I mean, it would have the opposite of the intended impact. So has RHA spoken to the governor-elect, soon-to-be governor, about this?
We at RHA, we try to speak to whoever will listen to us. And we have spoken at length with Lieutenant Governor Heck, who chaired the incoming governor's housing transition team. We were asked to present to the housing transition team policymaking team. Whether we like it or not, I know you don't like it as much, he's going to be the governor. Right. Yeah. So, and we at RHA are a bipartisan organization, and we want Washington to succeed for all of our residents in the state. And so as such, we support the incoming Governor Ferguson's goal to build 200,000 net units in his first term. That's 50,000 units per year net. And we just feel like that the rent control will directly oppose his goals that we support. You're not going to be able to hit those housing goals if we pass rent control. So while some of our membership, and maybe even you, Brandi, don't always necessarily agree with the governor, this is something that we do agree with him on, and we want these units to be built. And in order to get those net units, not only do you have to build more units, but you can't lose units. And when you pass rent control, small mom and pops like my membership have a tendency to leave. And as I told the transition team, the building industry can't build units faster than my members can sell them. So, we are deeply concerned about the momentum that this bill has, specifically in light of Governor Ferguson's goals.
Yeah, and I can appreciate you guys have to work with who you have to work with. I think I just have a natural skepticism. That's why I'm in this field about goals that are set. Like, goals are great, lofty goals, whatever it is. But when you're throwing numbers out there and you have either no plan to meet them, or you're supporting things, or your party supporting things that are actively undermining your goals, to me, the goal is nothing. To me, it's just a number until you show that you can actually start to reach some of the goals that you're setting. So I'm just very skeptical of it. Let me just ask you this, because coming into this segment, we talked about this whole the language adoption that the media is sometimes has a tendency to use the phrases that the party pushing a bill wants to be used. Rent control is one thing. Rent stabilization is a very different sounding thing. And when Democrats say rent stabilization, even though it's just rent control, we see the media just pick that up. And instead of saying rent control, they use the language that the Democratic Party wants them to use. So I guess in this debate over the next few months, what would your hope be as the media covers this issue, preferably fairly?
My hope would be is that the media calls it like it is, that rent control is rent stabilization, right? You can rebrand it any way you want. You can call it, sunshine and rosebuds. It doesn't make it not rent control. And whether we call it rent control or rent stabilization, the economic effects are the same across the country every time it's been tried, whether they called it rent control, whether they called it rent stabilization in California, for example. It leads to lack of supply, which damages people's ability to find a home. And that has real impacts on Washingtonians' lives. So I would hope that the media as a whole sees through the marketing and calls the thing what it is so that people can have an accurate understanding of what the thing does. Because rent stabilization, if that's what you want to call it, doesn't stabilize anything. It stabilizes the downward, I guess it does stabilize the downward supply, to the downward trend of number of units available in the market, that's for sure. But it doesn't stabilize the housing market. In fact, it's detrimental to the housing market.
Yeah, it is. And so we're going to see what happens with this. I mean, I think the fact that it was given a hearing on day one shows that it is a priority for the Democratic Party. There's also this interesting something happening behind the scenes. And I don't know if it's true. I'll just tell you what's being said. It was also brought up at the hearing. Emily Alvarado, who introduced the bill, who showed up at the hearing to testify. So, you know, it's above the level of a rumor because she was asked about it, basically. So Senator Joe Wynn is leaving. And so there's the thought that she's going to take his post in the Senate, in the higher chamber. And so there's this conspiracy, I'll call it. I won't get it yet. I have a new prop. That they're trying to get her to be able to vote on it in the House and then also vote on it as a senator to give them like the votes they need to be able to pass it. I don't know if that's true, but it's certainly something that people are talking about. So we'll monitor it from there. If you are a landlord, now is a really good time to become a member of RHA. It's about $260 a year. Not only do they advocate on your behalf in Olympia, but they can also help you navigate situations like this one. What if rent control passes and the 7% increase a year just ain't going to do it for you? So they're really good on giving you advice, helping you navigate the legalese, all that. RHAWA.org, RHAWA.org. Okay. This is probably one of the craziest bills that is going to happen this legislative session. We know that there is a lot of controversy around sanctuary policies. We know Donald Trump is going to come in and he is going to hopefully seek out, I would hope, prioritize people who are here illegally, who are committing crimes, etc. But maybe he even goes further than that. The reality is that our social safety net is being taxed by illegal immigrants. It's being stretched thin. We see that here in Washington state as well. We see shelter space and housing that we were already short on being utilized by illegal immigrants or people who are coming here with questionable asylum claims, who are now being sheltered, in parks and makeshift homeless encampments. And all of that is a drain on our already drained taxpayer funds in our social safety net and all of that. So get this. So there's a state lawmaker who, on top of all of that, has introduced a bill on the Democratic side that would give unemployment benefits to people who are in our state illegally. Let's talk about it in our segment, Unbelievable. Oh, good God. It's just insane to think this. And this is, by the way, they're also trying to give unemployment benefits to striking workers this year. So, decide to go on strike, unemployment benefits for you. Come to our country illegally and maybe not even pay taxes. I don't know what you've been doing since you've been here. Oh, unemployment benefits for you too. This is insane. And we wonder why we're in a $14 billion budget deficit. This from the State Standard. It says legislators will be looking at a bill to strengthen the safety net for immigrants working in the state. That sounds nice, doesn't it? Oh, they're just strengthening the safety net for immigrants working in the state without legal authorization. It all sounds, just that sentence. Legislators will be looking at a bill to strengthen the safety net for immigrants working in the state without legal authorization. Senator Rebecca Saldana, a Democrat from Seattle, shock of the century, is reintroducing a bill this session to help these workers access unemployment insurance, which is just the whole way that's structured is the entire problem with the media. Illegal people getting unemployment benefits that they do not pay for. It's just wild. This also from the Standard. Cost estimates. So this, again, it was already introduced in the 2023 session. Cost estimates for legislation introduced in 2023 showed the Washington program would cost about $100 million in the first 2-year budget cycle. And when the program becomes available, it will increase to $140 million in the cycle after that. And it would benefit a little over 5,300 workers each year. So in the middle of a budget crisis, $14 billion. And we have a governor coming in saying, 6% cut across the board. We're also going to do away with these programs that increase over time, pass it 1 year, and then the cost of it continues to increase each budget cycle after that. Democrats are pushing unemployment benefits that would cost $100 million, then $140 million for illegal immigrants. Here's the question I have. What's the motivation to come here legally anymore? What would be the motivation to do it legally? It costs you a bunch of money to do it that way. It might take you a decade or more to do it that way. If you could hop, skip, and jump literally over the border from Canada to the United States, go have lunch at the Peace Park. Go have lunch at the Peace Park in Blaine. Is that what they call it, Nicole? Yeah. Peace Park. Peace Arch Park in Blaine. Where you can sit at a picnic table with Canadians, and then you just swap places. They do it all the time. Come into the country. If you could do it that way, come live here. You get all the benefits that a legal citizen would have. You get unemployment benefits if you fall out of work. What's the benefit? What would be if you balance the two options? I would come here illegally too. Just honestly, just do it. Because unless Donald Trump's going to come round you up and throw you out, it's the same as living here legally. I would argue you're given even more deference by legislators in the state of Washington. If you are an illegal immigrant of the right color skin tone, you're going to get more deference, preferential treatment if you do that than if you wait 10 years, spend all this money, go through all these hoops to come here legally. They want it to be so there's really no difference. They want to make it so there is no difference between you and an illegal immigrant. No difference as far as the government is concerned. You all get the same benefits. Now you've had to pay more into the system, but you're going to get the same benefits as someone who's here illegally from another country. Why would you not come? Why would you not come to Washington State from a third world country? I absolutely 100% would. It is insane how far to the left the Democratic Party in the state has moved since I came here in 2010-ish. They were like relatively moderate. I mean, Jay Inslee won his campaign saying he wouldn't raise new taxes, and that was a popular stance among Democrats. And now in the middle of a $14 billion budget deficit, they want to push a bill to give unemployment benefits to illegal immigrants. And I should also note, just because I don't think we have this in the show today, down in California, Gavin Newsom, they're in the middle of this still ongoing crisis in California. I mean, an untold amount of money it's going to take to rebuild. With a fire department that had $17 million cut from its budget to be able to prepare and train and respond to a wildfire of this magnitude. You know what they did in the State House in California yesterday? They passed $50 million in spending to Trump-proof California. That was their priority. Well, LA's on fire. And you have firefighters who had to come in from all across the country, and you have a fire department that had its budget slashed by $17 million. They passed $50 million to Trump-proof California for potential litigation that when nothing's even happened, when Donald Trump hasn't even been sworn in for a second term. These people are nuts. That is nuts. It truly is. That's insane. Think about that as a priority. You could take that $50 million and you could give it to the LA Fire Department. You could give it to other fire departments. You could use it to harden California against these kinds of wildfires. And you give it to, virtue signaling over Donald Trump. And then here, $14 billion short, homeless individuals who are actually American or Washingtonian, who don't have enough shelter, and you're going to take their shelter and give it to illegal immigrants. Got illegal immigrants who are camped out in parks, draining social services, and now you want to make sure they also have unemployment benefits. That's not sound of mind. That is a fringe ideological position that I can't fathom. I can't even try and attempt to put myself in the position of someone who would support that, because that's mental. You have to have a mental health issue to push something like that. I mean, something is amiss. Something is truly off kilter to do that. That's wild. Hopefully that's something that doesn't get much traction. Can we do a second round of Unbelievable today? Okay, go for it. All right, so it was interesting, the timing of this. Nicole said, hey, have you seen this bill? I want to put this in the show today. And I thought, perfect timing, because I get this text yesterday. I won't name names. I get a text yesterday from a friend whose kid is a senior. And they had this exercise at school where, and we've seen similar stuff to this in the past, where it was like students were asked to talk about like good, strong role models. It could be historical role models or modern day figures who are good role models, right? And then they had like negative role models in historical figures or current day. And according to this student who expressed this to his dad, what happened in class, there was, Hitler, of course, on the bad role model side. Somebody want to guess who else was on the bad role model side?
Trump.
Donald J. Trump. Donald J. Trump. And so this senior had sort of said that they thought Trump was a good role model. The teacher wouldn't, this is according to the student, students' interpretation of events to their father. They had mentioned Trump in class, brave student, as a good role model. Teacher wouldn't allow it. But then someone else suggested putting Trump in the bad role model side, and the teacher allowed it. So did that happen? What do you think my first question to that dad was? Well, does he have a picture of it? Did he tape it? And he said no, because in my son's school district, they took away phones this year. They do not allow kids to have phones in the classroom, their cell phones. And this got me, we've had this debate before, right? Where, one of our most significant stories we've ever broken on the misconduct in our public school system and on the political and social indoctrination. It was the subject of our documentary, Operation Indoctrination, was because a 6th grader was so disturbed by a political rant happening in her classroom that she snuck in her backpack, pulled out her phone, and recorded it. And so there's been, and both parties are to blame for this, there has been support from both Republicans and Democrats, some on each side, to eliminate cell phones in classrooms. Some schools going as far as to say you actually have to turn it in. Sometimes when you go to like a comedy show, you get this little pouch and you put your phone in and it locks and you cannot unlock it except in certain areas of the school or during break times or whatever it is. So not even like, hey, you can't have your phone out in class. It's got to stay in your backpack or in your desk. Like they couldn't get access it even if they wanted to. And we've had that debate on this show about like, hey, what are the pros and cons of this? Because I think 5 years ago, we would all say, well, yeah, kids shouldn't be having their phones out in class. Like, they should be paying attention to what's happening in class. But now that there's all these political and social indoctrination, I have a hard time with that because we wouldn't know about some of these things if kids didn't have their phone accessible. I don't want them sitting on their phone, but if they've got their phone in their backpack and they can run out and they can grab it, they can sneak in and grab it. That's a totally separate thing. So there is a bill that has been introduced. It is House Bill 1122. And it says it's an act relating to improving student outcomes by restricting mobile device use by public school students. Student use of mobile devices in schools has had a multitude of negative effects on student outcomes. Mobile devices can be a constant distraction that disrupt the learning environment for all students. It is the intent of the legislature to restrict student use of mobile devices in public schools during instructional hours using the strategy or strategies recommended by the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. And I can't tell looking at it. I think these are all Democrats, right?
No, Rude's on.
Well, there's two Rudes. There's a Democrat Rude and a Republican Rude. So unless I look at this, I'd have to see which route it is that's sponsoring that. At first glance, it looks like all Democrats. But we have seen Republicans who have, oh, no, that's a rule. So it's rule and rude. So it is a bipartisan bill. So we've seen Democrats and Republicans talk about this as a good idea. This is a horrible idea. It's a horrible idea. And you look at like all the other things that they're doing in public schools. They think kids ought to have the ability to decide without parental consent to get life-changing surgeries or gender hormone therapy, and they want to hide that from parents, but kids aren't responsible enough to have their phones in school? You want a 14-year-old to be able to have a life-changing surgery to change their gender? You think they should be able to make that decision but they can't have a phone out in school. So it again is with that absolute like hypocrisy, and they have no real standard for kids, so all ideologically driven. But most of the sponsors on this bill are Democrats. And Democrats are in charge of our public education system and the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. They've been under a lot of criticism for the lack of outcomes in schools and for political and social indoctrination. Of course, they don't want kids to be able to document it. There's been all these stories. I would say half the stories we have that come out about what's happening behind the scenes in schools is because a kid took a picture of it or took a video of it. So until they get the political and social indoctrination under control, no. I don't want kids to be prohibited from having a cell phone. I think if the 6th grade girl, again, who recorded the rant from a teacher, had that 6th grader come to her mom and said, oh my gosh, this teacher was doing a guest presentation and they ranted about Ronald Reagan being a homophobe and Black Lives Matter and told all these lies about the Trayvon Martin case, the mom would have never probably brought that to us because she didn't have anything to prove it. It sounded so outlandish, and it was outlandish, and there was the audio to be able to prove it. So I don't know about you guys. We've done a poll on this before, and people were pretty split, but I have to say right now I'm falling on the side of you cannot physically lock up a child's phone. I also think there's a safety issue there. What happens if there's something that happens at school and they need to call 911 or whatever it is? So I like the idea of just be an adult in the room. And when a kid pulls out a cell phone, because again, they say the purpose of this is mobile devices can be a constant distraction that disrupts the learning environment. We had cell phones when I was in school. And if you had your cell phone out, they took it away from you until the end of the day. Do they not do that anymore? Can they not do that anymore? So don't let the kid have the cell phone out in class, just playing Candy Crush. Be an adult and say, I'm taking that phone if I see it one more time. Is that so hard? That kid will put that phone away. They don't want an adult to take their phone for the rest of the day. You don't have to lock up their phone unless you're trying to hide something, which I tend to think you are. Unbelievable. If you're thinking about selling your home at some point in 2025, reach out to our friend Wes Jones at sellwithwes.com. You can start by asking Wes for a free market analysis. He'll kind of look at how your neighborhood is, how homes in your neighborhood have performed, what you can do to make sure you get the best possible offer for your home. You can also go to their website, sellwithwes.com, plug in your address and use their free home value calculator to see how much your home is worth. It might be worth more than you think. And Wes said, look, the housing market has been a little slow, a lot of slow, but houses are still going for some pretty impressive prices.
I'm hearing a lot of things. People are, oh gosh, well, there might be a recession coming up. I'm like, hey guys, anybody working in real estate has been living it for like the last 30 months or so. It's a strange conundrum though, because sales are low, but prices are still very, very high. You can still sell and you can plan on making a lot of money, but you might have to prepare your home a little bit harder and do a little bit more work than you have in the past because buyers are a little bit, less forgiving.
Yeah, so Wes can help you with all of that. They got something called the Listing Boost Concierge Service, can come in, help you do some cosmetic upgrades, pay for it up front if you need them to, manage those projects. They really try to take the stress away from the home selling process. So sellwithwes.com, sellwithwes.com, a better way to sell your home. All right, a little bit of national news, but it's got a local twist here. So all these companies have been dropping DEI, even companies who you kind of would expect to stick to it for a little bit longer. Amazon is one of those. I mean, I remember these images of this Amazon conference in Las Vegas. We might have had it on the show where you walked in, it was for employees, and it had all these little magnets you could add to your name badge. And like the magnets would be like your gender pronoun or whatever it is, or if you were like, what's the word they use for if your brain doesn't like function normally? Neurodivergent. And so you could put it all on your thing. And I'm like, okay, Amazon's sticking to the DEI for as long as they can ride that train. Well, maybe not. This from the Washington Post. Amazon cuts mentions of DEI and LGBTQ rights from public policies. It says a commitment to helping Black people live, quote, free from fear and all occurrences of the term transgender disappeared from a page listing the online retailer's policies late last month. It says, before late December, Amazon's webpage listing its policy position said the company stood in solidarity with Black employees and customers and supported, quote, legislation to combat misconduct and racial bias in policing, efforts to protect and expand voting rights, and initiatives that provide better health and educational outcomes for Black people. The paragraph containing those statements is no longer on the webpage. Okay, let's see here. It says Amazon also previously said on that page that it was working at the U.S. federal and state level on legislation on protections for transgender people. It said that the company provided gender transition benefits based on the standards of care published by the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. The section with those claims has also been deleted. Now, of course, that doesn't mean they're not doing some of those things, but I would ask, like, let's say you have an issue that's in the news, right? Like racial justice was in 2020 with George Floyd, and you've got, this uprising across the country, and a company like Amazon posts something and says we're in solidarity and want changes to policing. How many years do they have to keep that up for? Do you just have a page that is like an existing living document that you add things to every time there's another event that's like captured the nation's attention, and you can never take it down? So on some of that stuff, I'm like, well, I mean, it's been, 4 years since the whole racial uprising thing. But on the LGBTQ stuff, that's interesting because I would say that that's kind of on the upswing. I mean, there's certainly more conversation around LGBTQ issues and controversy around transgender issues and transgender reassignment surgeries. So maybe they're just like, hey, we sell stuff online at reasonable prices that gets to you at rapid speeds. So maybe we shouldn't be weighing in on transgender surgeries and stuff like that, given how controversial it is. So I think it's interesting, though. I would like to see Amazon. I've been critical of Amazon in terms of them trying to cater too much to progressive woke ideology, because Amazon, first of all, when you're in a business like that, you've got so many people buying your stuff and they span the entire human experience, right? And so to take positions on things that are so inherently not only controversial but fringe and selective, like the number of people impacted by like trans surgeries is minute comparison to the world population, which they serve the world population. So I just don't see the upside for it for a business like Amazon. I don't see how it serves any particular purpose for them. And they cater so much to the left and left woke ideology, and then the left turns around and paints them as the enemy. So why do they bother trying to get in the good graces of the left and push all these things? And they have this massive workforce, tens upon tens of thousands of employees. You think all of them are in favor of transgender surgeries and stuff like that? No. So is that even a good representation, those values of your workforce? So maybe Amazon is coming around to the realization that, like, hey, we're not going to meddle in these spaces, and public opinion on these things is changing, so let's just stay out of it. But speaking of DEI, so Pete Hegseth had he's having his confirmation hearings before the Senate. I watched a little bit of it on Fox this morning. It's interesting because I think there are some legitimate questions for Pete Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense. I think that, this is a Fox News host. Of course, he served our country honorably. He does have some stuff in his personal background, but he doesn't have like this experience in the public sector or, real significant experience in the private sector. And I think it's totally pertinent to ask him about those things. He'd be managing the Department of Defense, and that's huge. And does he have the ability to do that from that perspective? So some of the questions I thought were just fine. Somebody in a position that important, I do think that he should be asked difficult questions. But I really loved, and one of the things about Pete Hegseth, and I'll just be frank, I don't know if he's qualified to do that job. I know that he served in the armed forces, and he did so honorably. I know he's a good communicator, right? I don't know that he's the best person for that job. I think Senator Joni Ernst was also very skeptical. She's a veteran as well. And she sounded at the onset like she wasn't going to be on board. They had some private meetings. He was able to convince her. So I'm not like of all the Trump sort of picks for things. This is one that I don't have a strong opinion on, one way or the other. I think watching the unhinged nature of the attacks against him kind of tells you something, and then you want to be on his side because you see the media and the left do to him what they did to Donald Trump. So whenever that happens, I tend to just kind of root for someone. But one of the things I love is that he is completely unapologetic about wanting to get and scrub any trace of DEI out of the military.
Our standards will be high and they will be equal, not equitable. That's a very different word. We need to make sure every warrior is fully qualified on their assigned weapon system, every pilot's fully qualified and current on the aircraft they are flying, and every general or flag officer is selected for leadership or promotion purely based on performance, readiness, and merit. Leaders at all levels will be held accountable, and warfighting and lethality and the readiness of the troops and their families will be our only focus.
Love it. I mean, maybe that's all I need to know. Because one of the things that we've seen, even if military readiness is obviously in the toilet, right? But when you have, and there's so many examples of this, when you have, service members posting videos of them in their uniform and then in drag, for instance, and when you have the military and some of the highest leaders in the military, doing the pride events and all these things, and talking about issues that have nothing to do with military readiness, defending the nation, you know how much China loves that, Russia loves that, Iran loves that. Our enemies fuel that. If you don't think that that kind of content gets so widespread on social media because our enemies fuel it, then I can't help you with that one. And so a lot of these things not only make us weaker, but they make us look weaker, which is almost as important. You can be in a state when it comes to military readiness, and I'm not an expert on the military and all that, but you can be and have concerns about military readiness. Donald Trump's really good at this. But if you are every step of the way putting forth a foot that says we are the most powerful force on the planet, like we will crush you, and having this forward-facing persona of strength, right? Then you can be a little concerned about military readiness and numbers and all of that. But our enemies don't see it in the same way. So if Pete Hegseth wants to come in and he wants to rid our military of DEI and this weakness, then you know what? I'm all for it. So we'll see if he's able to survive a Senate confirmation. All right, we'll get to our daily subscriber show poll next. I asked you guys what single issue you believe most defines Governor Jay Inslee's 3 terms in office. Can't wait to hear what you had to say. First, Zach Abraham and his team at Bulwark Capital are having their first of 2025, I believe, free live webinar. It's happening on January 30th. It will be a full reveal of how Bulwark Capital uses their risk management strategy to adjust to a volatile world. You will not want to miss the 2025 preview webinar. During it, Zach has a ton to cover. He'll talk about the new administration, how it might impact your retirement portfolio, the current state of the market, and an outlook for 2025. And then, of course, they'll talk about how Bulwark is always looking for opportunities to lower risk, lower cost, and give your retirement as much upside as possible. So it's time to get another perspective on your retirement portfolio, just as you would for a critical health decision or diagnosis. So their free live webinar, Thursday, January 30th. You can sign up right now for free, knowyourriskradio.com. That's knowyourriskradio.com. Okay. All right, in our daily subscriber show poll on Patreon, Locals, and X, I asked you guys, given that it is Jay Inslee's last official day as governor after 12 long years, 12 years of that guy. It's just insane. I said, what single issue do you believe most defines Governor Jay Inslee's 3 terms in office? Here are the options I gave. His climate agenda, his COVID-19 response, his handling of homelessness and crime, or something else. Is there something I haven't thought of? And this is such a mixed bag. I've never seen a poll so evenly split. It's almost like 30, 30, 30, and then a little bit for other. So right now, by a narrow margin on Patreon, people are saying his climate agenda is what will most define his 3 terms in office. John says what he did do was raise taxes. Otherwise, his agenda wasn't my agenda. Sharon says, I voted homelessness and crime because it's the most noticeable, but all of these apply. E says his incompetence and lethal ineptitude will be the prevailing legacy he leaves behind. Street says 970 plus days of taking over the legislative powers by declaring a state of emergency will be his legacy. Valjean, unabated greed. Joanna says, I chose other. His iron fist rule during COVID with no real science to back him, his grift of climate change, his lack of any direction or plan to affect homelessness, oppression of middle to lower class Washingtonians with tax after tax after tax, and making us the most ridiculously woke state in the U.S. Nothing good. Robert says sheer ineptitude, incompetence, corruption, and lack of openness across all the spectrums. And Stacy says his biggest legacy will be just that he's a liar, which I will say that's the one that bothers me the most. And I think that's the journalistic background where I just have this crazy expectation that politicians will tell the truth, and if they don't, that they'll be held accountable for lying. And they're just not. So they just lie with this insane ease over things that are like easily disprovable. Where it's like, no, you said that. No, I didn't. Yeah, you did. No, I didn't. Here's your quote. No, I didn't say that. Here's the video. No, I didn't say that. I mean, it's insane, and we've allowed this to happen, right? But he really took the ball and ran with it. Like, oh my God, we taught him early on that he can get away with lies, so he just kept on going with it. Let's see, a couple from Locals. Subscribers on Locals say his handling of COVID-19 will be his biggest legacy. That and his tax, and tax some more, says Mac52. Dr. Sarah says, Brandi, to put it this way, as a semi-new Washington resident when COVID started, I barely knew who the guy was. The whole COVID debacle introduced me to him. And from that point, I learned what a corrupt individual he is. As someone who was deeply affected by COVID policies, as was my family, I'll always remember his behavior during the last 4 years and how he treated those who held his political views different, different from his. And let's face it, his COVID policies contributed to other issues like crime and homelessness and ruined this state. Yeah, we have a big, deep, part of me is like, he left a big, deep hole for all of us, right? I mean, he left our state in a worse place than he found it. But I'm kind of glad it's Bob Ferguson who has to be the one to try to dig us out of it, because he's not going to be able to. And at some point, hopefully voters wake up to that. You're not going to be able to fix that problem without someone who is a 180. Like the party that put us in this position is not going to be the party to fix it, no matter how moderate Bob Ferguson wants to act. There's just so much to think about. And I'm not, again, I wish I could sit here and find a few nice things to say to you about Governor Inslee. But it's not my job to judge him as a person. It's not my job to judge him as a husband and as a father and as a grandfather and as a Washingtonian. It's my job to judge him as a politician and as the elected governor of this state for 12 years. And by any metric, by any reasonable metric, his time as governor was a complete and utter failure. All right, we'll get to your comments. Well, actually, let's do it right now. Matt Gilbert, $5 super chat. Jay is an inspiration. Even if you flunk out of Stanford and graduate from Willamette University, you run for president. Did he flunk out of Stanford? I don't know. Krista, I'm shocked Brandi is so calm while reciting all these brilliant wins of Inslee. I don't think I could be as calm or collected. Well, I've been talking about his failures for years. At this point, they just roll off the tongue because, it's not news to me, not news to a lot of you. Caroline says 7% increases when it comes to rent is typically double what increases are given to 7% increases is typically double what increases are given to Social Security, disability, pension, and even wages. So do the math, Democrats, and tell me how those you are saying you are protecting will be protected. Obviously, my calculator must be broken. Yeah. T.Z. Burton, the goal of mass illegal immigration is to break the USA, take away borders, language, and culture, to make us serfs like the old lords and kings. Yeah, that's true. Well, I already feel like that sometimes. I already feel like I'm being lorded over. B. Larson, students do not need their phones in class. There are enough distractions. Why not just broadcast all classroom activities? You could use it to go back and check on lessons when necessary. So that's a good alternative. All I'm saying is I don't want teachers in there unsupervised or unchecked because they've proven that they can't be trusted. A lot of them can be trusted, but across the board, there's been some issues. So yeah, if there's an alternative, I would rather kids not have to be the ones to break out their phone and record it and risk getting in trouble. So I'm fully in favor of, I don't need it broadcast live. I think that's a safety issue. But you record it, and then it stays on a database. And if there's a question or an accusation, that's good for the teacher too, right? It's like body cameras on cops. If there's a question or an accusation about what went down, go to the tape, roll the tape. We'll find out exactly who's telling the truth and exactly who's lying. The teacher who allegedly brought a pink sparkly dildo to class down in Olympia, roll the tape. She claims it was an anatomically correct learning device, not a pink sparkly dildo, and that she didn't suction it down to the table, So we'll find out real fast. Let's roll the tape. Let's see if she brought a pink sparkly dildo to class or not. So I actually agree, Bob. I think that's a good, because I don't want kids to have make no mistake, I don't want kids to have phones in class either. But I do think there are a couple ways around that. You just tell them, put it away. When is that not effective? And if they don't put it away, then you send them to the principal's office and you take their phone. And you call their parents. So that was effective for us. Are teachers so soft that they can't do that now? But I do agree, recording what happens in class, even if it's just an audio recording, I don't think that will solve everything, but it would be better than nothing. That might be the way of the future. Shirley Lopez, digital recorders for audio, or maybe every kid can wear a GoPro. He's got kids going around, just looking around. That's a terrible idea. Leland Taylor, my 12-year-old son chose Trump as a positive historical figure too. No phones allowed here, but he and my daughter may or may not be wearing cameras. Oh my God, you're equipping your kids with cameras? Also, Hegseth needs to be confirmed, and it may be the most important confirmation. Most people have no idea how weak our military and combat readiness is. I have no doubt about that. I just don't know that he is the most qualified person that Trump could have found for that job. It doesn't mean he won't be able to do a good job. It's just kind of a pick that I don't have a passionate opinion about him getting confirmed or not confirmed. So, all right, we'll get to our closing sanity check and a final farewell to Governor Jay Inslee and someone much more important than Governor Jay Inslee coming up next. But first, we've been talking about Natchez. You want to do Unbelievable again, Nicole, or what? You sure? You good? You have something? You can't, I know, but it's not my fault your mic doesn't work today.
My fingers don't either.
Well, let me guess, you're cold. Nicole always complains that she's really cold and it's hard for her to push buttons because her little old lady fingers are all shriveled up, and it's not cold in here right now. It's not cold in here. She's got she can't defend herself, her mic's not working. She's sitting over there with a heated blanket. I have a dress on. I'm doing fine. And then she says that her fingers get cold. I'm just kidding, Nicole. It's a little chilly in here. She says they're cold. Yeah. So Nicole's always cold. That's a totally different thing. Anyway, we've been talking about Natchez RV Resort, natchezrvresort.com, and they have a new phase grand opening that's happening January 25th and 26th. And these are the best properties in the entire resort. So if you've been thinking about it, these are the properties you want to look at because there's 25 premium extra large RV lots, amazing unobstructed views, total privacy. Nothing is going to be developed behind you. So don't miss out on your opportunity. These lots start in the low 70s. Natchez is just a short drive from Seattle, but obviously it is a world away. They got 300 days of sunshine, year-round family fun, fishing, hunting, skiing, golf, wine tastings, and more. They've got their pool open, their hot tub. It's all great. 4,300 square foot clubhouse. Totally cool. Fitness center. I mean, you name it. They've got it there. So reserve your showing for Natchez RV Resort's brand new phase grand opening, January 25th and 26th. 25 premium view lots from the low 70s. natchezrvresort.com. natchezrvresort.com. Okay. All right. With that, let's get to our closing sanity check. Just want to end again, 12 years of King Inslee. Not sad to see him go. But he's been the governor for 12 years nonetheless. There's certainly been some memorable moments in that time. So we'll end the show today with a farewell to Washington's three-term governor, Jay Inslee.
Governor, I'd like to ask you about what's going on in Seattle. There's this thing called the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. What's your thought on that? The fact that the protesters have taken that over and not allowing people to come and go freely?
Well, that's news to me, so I'll have to reserve any comment about it. I have not heard anything about that.
What should voters make of the fact that you were apparently oblivious to police abandoning an entire precinct in the state's largest city?
Yeah, well, listen, if you look at the facts of that situation, I could not have been oblivious to it because I actually deployed the Washington State National Guard.
Sir, then why do you say you did not know about it?
You'll have to go back and look at some quote. I can't comment on the quote right now.
This is news to me. You went on to say, I haven't heard about it from any credible source. Nearly 2 days after CHOP happened, you're now saying you did know about CHOP.
Listen, I can't tell you. I knew about CHOP. The calls we have made have been very difficult, but they have succeeded. I'm not sure you want to go back and reform when you won the Super Bowl. And we've won the Super Bowl of the COVID pandemic. Unfortunately, we see COVID activity hitting us big time. The morgues and funeral homes in Cowlitz County are at capacity. They've had to get refrigerated trucks to hold the deceased so that they can be treated with dignity.
When Governor Jay Inslee toured the destruction in the burned town of Malden, he brought a gift with him.
The first thing our state did for this community is I delivered to to the mayor a box of Honeycrisp apples that Trudy and I picked this morning from the governor's apple tree.
Later, he'd visit the wildfire-rampaged Okanagan County. It's a huge apple-growing community, so the folks there were expecting he'd change tact for that trip.
There's apples everywhere. We're surrounded by apples. It's apple harvest. Surely he'll bring us something different. And surely he did not.
Things got weird when people started to examine the fruit more closely.
My son brought me the apple that I always crack the apples open, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is rotten. This is horrible. Nobody would eat this.
The apples were filled with maggot larvae.
You are a bioreactor facility generating virus and spreading it around, including to kids who can't get vaccinated. I want to reiterate that. If you're a 50-year-old man who, voted for Donald Trump and didn't think COVID was a problem and you don't get vaccinated right now, you arrest every kid in your city. And if that's not judgmental, so be it.
These folks couldn't run a 2-car funeral as far as I can tell right now.
And then they're so incompetent, they can run a 2-car funeral.
I got to tell you, these people couldn't run a 2-car funeral.
So I am announcing today that I'm a candidate to become the next president of the United States.
It's become clear that I'm not going to be carrying the ball. I'm not going to be the president, so I'm withdrawing tonight from the race. We might put your name on the do not handshake list.
Farewell, Trudy Inslee, the only Inslee that we will miss in Washington State. That has been today's episode of Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. You'll need it as a new chapter in Washington State starts tomorrow with Governor Bob Ferguson. Oh, it hurts to even say. I had a little palpitation there. Governor Bob Ferguson. Oh, my voice crack even. I can't get it out right. Hold on. Governor Bob Ferguson. Oh, we have a lot of work ahead of us. A lot of work. If you want to sign up to support our show, you can do that for just $5 a month. And we'll buy an extra blanket for Nicole. Everybody's like, Nicole, you need to record your abuse. Report to HR. There is no HR department. I'm HR, and I rule that I'm correct. That's it. Yeah. undividedpod.com. undividedpod.com. We'll see you back on the live show tomorrow at noon. A lot of Nicole sympathizers in the comments. She's fine. Hostile worker. She's fine.